top focus. In a major embarrassment to the American pharma giant Pfizer, its CEO Albert Bourla was confronted by two journalists in Davos who posed questions about the inefficiency of Pfizer's COVID vaccine. In a 6-minute-long video that has now gone viral online, the journalists asked Bourla when did he get to know that the vaccines did not stop COVID transmission and how long was it before he informed the public of the same. The Pfizer CEO kept walking and saying thank you very much as he completely avoided all the questions that the journalists threw at him. It is important to note what the journalists actually asked. They asked, and I quote, "You said it was 100% effective, then 90%, then 80%, then 70%, but we now know that the vaccines do not stop transmission. Why did you keep that a secret?" So why did Pfizer keep the truth away from the public? As per reports online, it was analyzed that Pfizer's revenue could reach $101.3 billion in 2022, with major contributions coming from the company's BioNTech partnered COVID vaccine. This level of revenue is unheard of in the pharma industry. Johnson & Johnson, for comparison, the world's greatest biopharma company, by revenue for years has recorded $82.6 billion in 2020. So amidst accusations of pandemic profiteering, what really are the lessons for the world? We take this conversation forward, but before that, quickly listen in to what happened to the Pfizer CEO in Davos.
Mr. Bourla, can I ask you, when did you know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission? How long did you know that without saying it publicly?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Answer that question. I mean, we now know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission, but why did you keep it secret? You said it was 100% effective, then 90%, then 80%, then 70%. But we now know that the vaccines do not stop transmission. Why did you keep that secret?
Have a nice day.
I won't have a nice day until I know the answer. Why did you keep it a secret that your vaccine did not stop transmission?
Is it time to apologise to the world, sir? To give refunds back to the countries that poured all their money into your vaccine that doesn't work, your ineffective vaccine?
Yeah, you have a little bit around.
Are you not ashamed of what you've done in the last couple of years?
Do you have any apologies to the public, sir?
Are you proud of it? You've made millions on the backs of people's entire livelihoods. How does that feel to walk the streets as a millionaire on the backs of the regular person at home in Australia, in England, in Canada?
What do you think about on your yacht, sir? What do you think about on your private jet? Are you worried about product liability? Are you worried about myocarditis?
What about the sudden deaths?
What do you have to say about young men dropping dead of heart attacks every day? Why won't you answer these basic questions? No apologies, sir.
Do you think you should be charged criminally for some of the criminal behaviour you've obviously been a part of?
How much money have you personally made off the vaccine?
How many boosters do you think it'll take for you to be happy enough with your earnings? Nothing?
Who did you meet with here in secret? Will you disclose who you met with?
So there you heard it, what happened to the Pfizer CEO in Davos. Joining me on the broadcast is Dr. Sanjeev Bagai, who is chairman of the Nephron Clinic and also a Padma Shri awardee. I also have with me Dr. PSV Rao, consultant surgeon, Manipal Hospital in Bengaluru. Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, with us on the broadcast as well. We have Sanjeev Srivastava, foreign affairs expert. Let me begin this conversation with Dr. Bagai, if I can. Dr. Bagai, what do you make, sir, of this confrontation that's happened in Davos?
There is so much to make of it. So let's split it into three parts. Otherwise, we all are going to get hugely confused. The first part is the medical part. The second part is the internal lobbying and the marketing strategy, what the company internally followed. And third is with regards to the results. Let's break it up into the first part. The first part is worldwide studies. More than 147 meta-analysis data crunching studies have shown all vaccines, including the mRNA vaccines, have worked well. Now, come to the side effects. With regards to side effects, we know that the Indian vaccines have a very low rate of side effects. The international mRNA vaccines have a higher rate of myocarditis versus the adenovector based, 30 times more. The next point is, were the vaccines would have been useful in India? The question is, what was the cost, what would have been put? Without any accountability and responsibility, without an indemnity as far as the patients are concerned, it's impossible to get a new product into the Indian shores. So them trying to bully India was completely wrong. I don't stand by that. And it required a very, very stringent storage in terms of logistics in super freezing temperature of -60 to -80, in which you needed commercial industrial chillers, not possible in a country like India, especially during a pandemic. Now come to the questions which the journalists have asked. Now the questions asked is, what about the transmission? When a vaccine is launched, I'm surprised that this journalist has actually asked this question. The transmission can only be checked in the real world data, that is after the vaccine is launched. The transmission has been shown in multiple studies to decrease from 32 to 50%. The vaccine efficacy, which was initially promised to be 98%, dipped because of the Delta surge, and now more than 650 sublineages of Omicron, the efficacy in terms of the vaccine effectiveness, in the real world data is down to 30 to 50% in different studies in different parts of the world, which is not unique for mRNA, but all vaccines put together. With regards vaccines, including mRNA vaccines, they do even decrease long COVID. 9-fold decrease in infection and up to 13 to 25-fold decrease in hospital admissions and death.
Okay.
With regards the mRNA vaccines, what it had promised internally with the government and their legal or illegal marketing practices, I don't think any one of us are privy to it. The last quick point I want to make very quickly is, my main concern is of all the opposition leaders unscientifically creating a lot of vaccine hesitancy and creating misinformation. It contains, they said it contains cow protein, it contains pig proteins, and it's not going to work. With regards to AstraZeneca and the Covishield was wrong. I think the Indian vaccines are extremely good. The message which I want to give to everyone is, trust the Indian scientists. The decision which India took not to bring in Pfizer was correct. We relied on the 2 Indian vaccines, correct. Has it worked for India? Absolutely correct. Over to you.
All right, Gautam Mukherjee, let me bring you into the conversation. There has to be some learning here, not just for India, but for the rest of the world, because as Dr. Bagai was pointing out, there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy vis-a-vis Indian vaccines that was created. Now, today, there is a whistleblower who has raised a lot of data integrity issues against Pfizer. He says that participants were placed in the hallway after injections and were not monitored by clinical staff. There was no timely follow-up of patients who experienced adverse events after getting the vaccine. There were protocol deviations that were not being reported. The vaccines were not being stored at proper temperatures. There were mislabeling of lab specimens and also targeting of certain staff for these type of problems. So somewhere, Gautam Mukherjee, this mindset that we have developed, which clearly some of the opposition parties in India are also not being able to let go of, we need to now work towards shedding that mindset that if anything is made abroad, it is foolproof and it has to be good and it has to be better than what is being offered in India.
Well, I think it goes a little bit more political than that. I think the idea was to derail the Indian effort by maligning the Indian Covaxin as well as Covishield, even though it was foreign in origin and was only being made under license in Pune. However, efficacy of both vaccines were in the high 70 percentiles. And, while Dr. Bagai gave some quite a good report at about 30%, I have read reports that said the Pfizer vaccine was as low as 12 to 15% effective. And yet, they sold this all over the world because of the massive marketing machine and their stature as one of the giants in the pharmaceutical industry. to try and push these kind of vaccines sight unseen. Three great notables of the Congress party were very vocal about it: Rahul Gandhi, Chidambaram, another person, a third one, I forget his name, Jairam Ramesh. Yeah. So these three pushed it as hard as they could, saying that, we are going to make a mess of our own program. So you see, it isn't just about vaccines. They knew no better than anyone else, but they were following a political agenda, which is to bring it in, possibly make some money out of it from various agencies. But apart from that, to derail the Modi government's efforts, which they miserably failed at. Today, the Modi government's tackling of the COVID pandemic is seen as probably the best effort in the whole world. We vaccinated 1 billion people. We have developed, as all the doctors have been saying, herd immunity. And we have exported this for money, as well as given away millions of doses to the needy. The former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson praised Covishield, which saved his life. It was the Indian Covishield he was administered, and he plainly says that it is excellent, and India deservedly has the tag of pharmacy to the world.
Okay, Dr. PSV Rao, let me bring you into the conversation. So I just want to understand from you, should we expect then the WHO to maybe make a hue and cry about these revelations about Pfizer that have come out?
Good evening to you and to all the panelists and viewers. Yeah, you can't expect WHO to be making any hue and cry on this. WHO made, what they did was to delay the recognition to the Indian vaccines. This is what they did, and I'm sure this was done to keep the Chinese masters happy. It is very sad that the reputation of WHO, which was built over years of good work, has been ruined during this pandemic, and rightly so. Now, as far as our vaccines are concerned, the Covaxin, which was developed by ICMR, the Pune, the National Institute of Virology, Pune, and commercialized by Bharat Biologicals, is based on a very well-proved platform of inactivated virus vaccines with an adjuvant. And this is its safety profile and its efficacy for various other viruses has been proved. This is a proved technology. Now, Covishield has also used a technology which has been used in the past for other viruses. So it only was for the new virus, a new vaccine. But mRNA vaccine was an unproved technology. It was being developed for cancer, and then it was repurposed in a hurry for COVID-19. Now, as you already mentioned, there was a whistleblower saying various shortcomings in the testing. The testing was actually outsourced by Pfizer. It was not done by Pfizer itself, it was outsourced. And the whistleblower is from that company to which it was outsourced. Pfizer also arm twisted many nations, including, like the example is Brazil. They made Brazil sign a sovereign immunity, saying that any kind of side effects will be Brazil government's responsibility and not the Pfizer responsibility. Second, they made the Brazilian government gives security of their assets abroad to the Pfizer government to ensure that payments were made to Pfizer. Pfizer also, the cost of it was very high. These are all issues. You compare that with what India did with its vaccine. Instead of profiteering, we gave it free. We gave it at very low cost. These are all issues that you need to compare and see what was happening.
Right.
And so the Indian government rightly refused to give indemnity to Pfizer refused to give its assets abroad as security to Pfizer. And as far as Moderna is concerned, it may be, according to reports, only slightly better than Pfizer, but it is the same technology. So this is an untested technology, and in a hurry, it was used for this. But what was wrong was the profiteering, the fact that Western governments stocked it, refused to give it, even when it started expiring. They were stocking it and refusing to give poor nations. And how can poor nations refuse, use a vaccine which needs, say, very extent freezing conditions like what Dr. Sanjeev Bagai has already mentioned. You don't have that kind of refrigeration network. So this is all meant for the rich nations, and it was meant for profiteering. This is what was totally wrong. You should not be using a pandemic to profiteer.
Absolutely. And Sanjeev Srivastava, the reason why I ask about the WHO or any other international body for that matter is very simple, right? Because when the whole Indian cough syrups issue happened in Gambia, which still there's no clarity on whether the Indian cough syrups, particularly in Gambia, were responsible or not, the WHO did make a hue and cry, and they labeled Indian cough syrups very dangerous. But given these revelations about Pfizer that are now coming out, and given how strong some of these lobbies are, the Pfizer and co lobbies are, how does one ensure that there are good practices in the medical community going forward?
Well, WHO's credibility is at stake. They have not performed any good during the corona pandemic. If you look at the WHO's performance during the SARS pandemic in 2002 and 2019 corona pandemic, there's a huge difference. At that time, I think WHO did very well, but in this case of COVID-19 pandemic, they have performed very, very poorly, and obviously it quite is likely that they were doing all this at the direction and indication of the Chinese masters. And that is what is very much there. As far as these big giants like Pfizer, these big companies of the West like Pfizer is concerned, I think they have also got exposed now in a way. And they were trying to arm twist Indian companies, arm twist Indian government for all indemnity, etc. But now the reports which are coming, the kind of questions which are being raised, I think it has really exposed them, and that's why the top official of the Pfizer was not able to give any answer to those questions. Obviously, there are huge weaknesses in their practices, and they did not test it properly, and obviously they released it without proper verification, etc. So I think the big giants like Pfizer, they have also got exposed, but the WHO and its practices vis-a-vis dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic is very, very poor, and WHO is gradually losing its credibility, which was built over the years with a very hard work by the scientists and doctors all around the world. And we blame all the time China, but now the kind of reports which are coming that China is obviously responsible for spreading this virus. But if you have not tested your vaccines properly, if data is not very satisfactory, and then you are releasing it for the profiteering, if you're releasing it for various countries, I think you are again doing a kind of a criminal act, the same kind of a criminal act which has been done by China. So I think it has raised a huge question mark on a big giant like Pfizer, which had got a very huge reputation, big reputation in the international community. But certainly they will have to answer these questions, and I think these questions were very pertinent questions in a way that why this were not tested for those who were infected already, and why it was only working for those who were not infected. So these are the very pertinent questions which Pfizer should answer, and Pfizer should improve their medicine before rolling it out for the world.
Right, absolutely. Let me bring Dr. Bagai back into the conversation. Dr. Bagai, I just want to understand from you, sir, and I want to bring back an earlier point that I was making. There are so many people that we know who actually made the effort of going all the way to America to take the Pfizer vaccine because they didn't want the Indian-made vaccines. Like I said, somewhere there has to be a learning for us and for the rest of the world as well. While we can't expect maybe a WHO or another international body to really look into all these allegations that are coming out against Pfizer at this point in time. But we need to work on changing our own mentality, because people have spent lakhs of rupees to just go to America and then spend a few thousand more to get this vaccine. Because we believe that it's made in the West, it's made in America, so it must be the best.
Two quick points on this. I think the Indian vaccines, in terms of technology and the platform it has used, is extremely robust. We were in a very, very extremely uncertain period, especially during the Delta. I want everyone to appreciate, we didn't know what was happening today, leave alone tomorrow. People were just dropping dead like ninepins because of the infection. There was a huge psychological scare in people's mind, and leave alone the vaccine hesitancy which was caused by the opposition parties. So if few people took that decision, so be it. But I want to reassure that people who have taken the vaccine of Pfizer, it is still useful. Let's not decry the technology. Millions of doses have been given. But what India did for Indian citizens was more correct. We relied on our own technology. We relied on our own tram tracks, which were already there in place because of a very robust immunization program. We used our own scientists, our own research, our own data, and we have actually shown to have extremely good results in terms of one of the lowest case fatalities in the world per million population with regards the recent data now. We have about every life is valuable and every death is extremely saddening. But we have death rate of about 320 to 330 per million population. The West is reaching a figure. Even now, as I speak, thousands are dying in the Western countries every day due to the new Omicron sublineages. They have a case fatality nearing 2,500 to 2,800 per million. So India has done well. We should trust the Indian scientists. We must trust the Indian government. The decision they have taken at that point of time was to keep India first, nation first. It's very easy for opposition parties to say, get in a foreign brand. The question is the logistics of transporting it, especially during the summer months, the super chilling environment which is required to store it, to transport it. Logistically, it is a nightmare. It is next to impossible. The cost would have been prohibitive. And plus the legal indemnity which they were asking, you can't launch a product and not have any responsibility for it. That's my major fight in my mind against Pfizer. Pfizer product is not a bad product. The way they have gone about it, the policies is wrong. I think that's what needs rapid correction.
All right, Gautam Mukherjee, do you somewhere believe that maybe those in India who were sitting and demanding that the Pfizer vaccine be brought in and, that they didn't have a lot of trust in the Indian vaccine, do you think that they will at any point come out and apologize maybe upon reading the latest developments?
Deepika, I think that's extremely unlikely. These are very thick-skinned people with a very determined political agenda. They don't hoist the flag in Kashmir, and you expect them to apologize for something that they wanted. They wanted chaos over here. But let me go back to the fundamental point. Today, millions are still dying in China, and the infections are burgeoning. The reason is they didn't have an effective vaccine. They gave it away to the Seychelles, and the whole of the Seychelles got infected. Now, here, as Dr. Rao was saying on another session, they immunized, so-called, with their ineffective vaccines, their armed forces, and they're young. And now it goes on, and they never vaccinated more than 30%. In the West, you've got similar kind of sporadic efforts. There have been denials at the top. There have been stop and go attitudes. There have been demonstrations that why should I mask up? Why should I vaccinate, and so on. And their technology is inferior. It might work up to a point, but the statistics of casualties show that they have done very much worse. But in India, if you've got this West is best mentality among some people, It's just a post-colonial inferiority complex, and not much can be done about it. And good luck to them. But they need to wake up to the new India. We are not at everybody's mercy anymore.
Okay, Dr. Rao, given the latest developments then, does a new India now need to demand maybe better international practices? Because as we've discussed earlier, Pfizer got their approvals very quickly, whereas the Indian vaccine was stalled for a very long time. Now, I understand that back then the situation was precarious. Nobody knew what was going on. This was the first time in many decades that the world was witnessing a pandemic. So it is understandable that the situation, like I said, was not expected. But we can certainly learn something from it, Dr. Rao, and the learning has to be that perhaps India then needs to demand a change in international practices.
Yes, Devika, we need to be a bit more assertive about what we are capable of. And I would also take this opportunity to add that Pfizer and Moderna have now come out with a bivalent vaccine, which they say also covers the new variants. Whereas what we have come out is with a nasal vaccine. Now, three nations have tried developing the nasal vaccine, the Oxford in Britain and the Chinese, both of which have not yet been effective. So they haven't succeeded in the trials. Whereas our nasal vaccine has succeeded. As we have often mentioned earlier also in other sessions, the nasal vaccine is going to give you local immunity in the nose. Now, the major difference between coronavirus, the influenza virus, from other viruses where we have been far more successful is that the influenza and coronaviruses don't cause the kind of systemic infection initially. They are in the nasal area and spread. So you brought up that question which was asked about transmission. So if you have immunization at the entry level, then not only the problems of the infection are reduced, the chances of transmission are also reduced. This is just like the oral polio vaccine made a difference over the injection polio vaccine. Why? Because it gave you immunity at the gut level. Same way, this nasal vaccine, which India has now commercialized, I'm sure will give you a less transmissibility and less infection rate. And the success of that should force WHO to accept it. I am just waiting to see how long they will take to recognize it and give it respectability. And eventually, Devika, you will find the nations of the world, especially the poor nations of the world, will come requesting for this vaccine. So Absolutely. Let us see if it works in public. And meanwhile, these two companies, Pfizer and Moderna, are pushing their bivalent vaccine like they did the previous vaccine of theirs.
Okay, Dr. Bagai, last word to you, sir. We're running out of time, but what do you think now need to be the lessons for the international community, especially in terms of, getting approvals or some of these, the lobbies of some of these companies being so strong that they get the go-ahead while the rest of us are continuously, knocking on doors?
In every adversity, there is a huge opportunity for a nation. And I think India recognized that very early in the pandemic. I want to reiterate the fact that India's stature worldwide, not only in healthcare, but in administration as a role model, as being a statesman, as being a global leader, has increased many folds during the last 2 to 3 years. I'm not so worried about what the other countries need to do because they will do what they want to do. What India needs to do is to focus more on R&D. We need to invest more in R&D. I've tweeted on this. Our next budget must have a separate department, a separate ministry for research and development. We must have a separate department for genomics. And we must have our own pandemic alert center as a viral institute somewhere in central or northern India. We just have one institute of virology in Pune, but we need many, many more. And last very quick point is, we need a very, very good public awareness campaign. We need a separate policy for ventilation. indoor and outdoor. And the intranasal vaccine, I dare say, will be the first amongst many others to follow, which can be a game changer. Over to you.
Well, I thank all of our panelists for joining us this evening to take this conversation forward.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.